It's seldom we hear Jesus talk as powerfully as he speaks in Mark's gospel today. There's a passion in him about this. And I think for years growing up, I thought this must have been this terrible problem that existed in Israel at this time, that the husband writing bills of divorce and kicking the wife out. Then as I read more and understood more, I found out from the historians and the sociologists, etc., that there was divorce in Israel, but it was not something that was very rampant. It happened, but it was not a big problem. So that made me ask again, why is Jesus so powerful in what he says about divorce? Usually he's addressing a huge issue, especially with this much passion, And it had to be because not the divorce itself, but the social justice that was surrounding this issue. A woman leaves her family, goes to her husband, and belongs to him, okay? And that's the language to use. And if he throws her out, she has no place to go. She has nothing. And probably the only way she's going to survive is to become a prostitute. And Jesus, knowing this and knowing that the terrible ramifications of what divorce meant for individual women, and maybe they even had to take their children with them, because children, as you saw today later on in the gospel, who cared about them? The disciples are trying to shoo them away. Take care of those without power. And that has always been Christ's passion. Jesus was always about taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves. So the energy we experience here is directed to that situation. Now jump ahead 2,000 years to the United States, and the problem with divorce in our country is rampant. There is a terrible problem with divorce. And is the same energy that he loosed 2,000 years ago, can that and should that be loosed on the people of today? And I don't think so. I think that divorce is a terrible thing. I've always defined sin as separation, and you cannot find anything that is more separating than a divorce. And many of you have in your own families divorces. You know many people who have been divorced. It is a blow to the man or to the woman, to the family. Not because God said it was, just because it is. There's a separation that's going on there, a tearing apart that goes on there. And people may try to smile through it, but generally they can't and they don't. So there's no doubt that divorce is not a good thing. But I don't think that God holds someone's inability to live out a commitment as a terrible, sinful situation that leads them to lack of salvation, leads them to hell. The church actually does have a way of dealing with this, and it's called annulment. Thank you. It's called an annulment. And as they do these annulments, what they're supposed to be doing is allowing the two people to reflect on what happened. Where was the failure here? What wasn't right, so I may not do this again? And then they're allowed to remarry in the church. The annulment process is a good process from that point of view. It may not be something that everybody has to do, because there might be some exceptions to it because of different lengths of time that someone has been divorced. But in general, I think that's a very good tool for us to use. But I'd like to see the Catholic Church be a little bit more gentle with those people who are divorced, because it's not something that Jesus is speaking to today as he would have 2,000 years ago. But there are two other issues that I think are important that I would like to talk about. After Mass this morning, a young couple came up and they said that he had just proposed the night before, and they were now engaged, and they said, it was so wonderful to hear you talk about marriage. And this is really what these readings are about. They're not about divorce. They're about marriage. They're about what God wants for all of his people, I began this morning with talking about unity, belonging, coming together as one. The sacrament that most points that out for us is the sacrament of matrimony, where it becomes a symbol of what God wants for all of creation, where two become one, where more than two can become one, where we can all become one, but we begin with just two. And that sacrament symbolizes all of that for the whole world. This is a divine calling, this unity. It's symbolized by marriage. Should be worked at, because it's a very difficult thing to do. But it's something that you make, a choice you make every day. One of the students who graduated about 10, 12 years ago, married, was going through a very rough patch. And after it was over, she talked to me and she said, what finally got me through this was I realized I had to make a commitment to marriage itself, as well as to my husband. And when I began to do that, when I realized there was more than just more than he and I, then things began to change. The commitment to loving. I ask ourselves, what was it like in Jesus' time? Maybe not reflecting upon it very often, people back then didn't get married because they loved each other. It was a contract. You paid this many goats or this many cows and you got your wife. That's not a loving, bonding relationship to start with. But they grow together. You can choose to love the other one. And as you continually do that, something happens. Something wonderful happens. It's that choosing, the continual choosing. And I think that is what we're challenged to today in marriage, to continually, daily, many times a day, to choose to love the other. And finally, the other quote that Mark has Jesus bring up is this whole notion of complementarity. Male and female, he made them in their own image did God make them. We are packages that were the two personalities, the male and the female, belong together to complete the image of God that is in each one of us. That's why, contrary to a lot of people's thoughts, I think that marriage is probably a primary sacrament, because this is what reflects the image of God. God is three but one. We are two but one. It is this oneness that we're reflecting again. And the complementarity of it all is important. And I've struggled with that all my life as a priest. I recognize the value of the promise of celibacy that I have. It frees me to be here tonight. Otherwise, I might have to be with my family because my first responsibility would be to them. And I might not be able to fill this responsibility. So I recognize the gift of celibacy. And I thank God for that gift. But I also think that it's very difficult. The difficulty of priesthood is lacking that complementarity, of being able to have relationships and friends with people who will fill you out in ways that only a female would for a male. And that's where friendships come in. That's where knowing and drawing close to people, being honest with people, is part of the vocation of a priest. Because that's the only way in the priesthood, I think, that we will experience the complementarity of the sacrament of marriage.